All right, so for this deep dive, we are going in on the newly revealed Boeing F-47. It's a fighter jet, and we've gone through a lot of sources on this, official reports, news articles, you name it. So think of this as like your one-stop shop to get up to speed on what's going on.
Yeah, we're going to break it all down for you.
Exactly. The why, the what, and the how.
The need to know on this pretty important development in, well, air power.
Okay, so you've probably heard the buzz, right? It all started with President Trump mentioning this F-47, and turns out, yeah, it's a real thing, a sixth-generation fighter jet that Boeing is developing for the USAF. You know, part of that next-generation air dominance program, NGAD, and as we understand it, the main mission, to eventually replace those F-22 Raptors, make sure the U.S. stays ahead of the game in this, always changing global security world.
It's really fascinating how that initial announcement and the official designation played out. The president's statement, it definitely got people guessing about the F-47 name. The Air Force later clarified that the generals chose the name. Whatever the reason, it definitely grabbed everyone's attention.
Right from the start, for sure. So just so everyone's clear, we're talking about the Boeing F-47, a sixth-generation air superiority fighter, right? And Boeing is leading the development for the USAF under, like I said, the NGAD program. And yeah, its big job is to take over from the getting older F-22 Raptor fleet.
And the timeline they're aiming for is, well, pretty ambitious. The Air Force wants to see this F-47 ready to go by like the end of this decade. Some even say it could be in action as early as 2029. That's moving fast, especially in the world of military aircraft development. Usually things take, a lot longer.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Boeing, they haven't just gotten a contract. This is a big deal strategically. I mean, this is a win for their military aviation division, especially their fighter jet production line in St. Louis. We're even hearing they're putting serious money, billions, into new facilities there. That tells you they're in it for the long haul, right?
Right. And this is all part of a bigger picture. The NGAD program isn't just about this one plane. They call it a family of systems. What? The F-47 is like the centerpiece, the manned part of this network. But it's going to work alongside uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft. Those are the CCAs. This is a whole new way of thinking about air combat in the future.
And it's not like this came out of nowhere. I mean, they've been testing X-planes, experimental aircraft, since back in 2020. That's years of laying the groundwork for this F-47. So a lot of the core technology, it's already been through the ringer,
It's a really good point. All those years of flight tests, even before they revealed it, it means they're not starting from scratch. And that could be really key for hitting that aggressive timeline, getting it in service by 2029.
Okay, so now we know what it is, who's making it. But what really makes this F-47 different, special? Of course, a lot of the nitty-gritty details, they're still classified, right? Can't give away all the secrets.
Of course, got to keep some things under wraps for, national security reasons. But even from what they have said, we can see some pretty big advancements. We're talking significantly longer range than what we have now, more advanced stealth. And that's compared to the F-22 and F-35, which are already pretty darn stealthy.
They keep using that phrase, state-of-the-art stealth technology. It's like they're saying, we're making this thing practically invisible to radar. That's a bold statement.
It is. But if you look at the images the Air Force released, you can see some clues. They've got a nose designed for stealth, that classic stealth look, and a bubble canopy, which gives the pilot great visibility. That's important. Plus a chiseled chine flattened fuselage. All makes sense. But then there's those canards, and the way the wings are angled upward, that's unusual.
Those wings, right. You can't miss them. It's so different from those sleek, blended wing designs we've seen in some stealth concepts.
Exactly. So why go in this direction? Well, it could be a couple of things. Maybe it's a whole new approach to stealth, dealing with different frequencies, maybe even some kind of active camouflage. Or it could be a balance. They might be trading a little bit of that invisibility for better performance, at high speeds and altitudes, maybe going even further than the F-22 could. It's a real design challenge, but definitely interesting.
And thinking about the B-21 bomber, that program, they're talking about the F-47 having more resilient, contiguous stealth surface treatments. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, for the Air Force, it probably means easier maintenance. Earlier stealth planes, those coatings were very high maintenance, delicate. If they get damaged, it's a big problem. But tougher treatments. That means more uptime, less time in the hangar, and probably lower costs in the long run.
Got it. So they're also saying the F-47 will have these advanced sensor fusion capabilities. For someone who's not an engineer, what does that even mean? Like, what's the advantage?
Imagine it like this. It's not just about having a bunch of sensors. It's about making sense of all that data. You've got radar, infrared, electronic warfare systems. They're all feeding information. This system takes all that raw data and puts it together. It makes it meaningful for the pilot. So instead of being overwhelmed with information, they get a clear picture of what's happening all around them in real time. This helps them make faster, better decisions in combat. Crucial in a dogfight.
And this all ties back to the F-47 being the heart of the NGAD system, right? It's not meant to work alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The F-47 is designed to be plugged into a network, connected to satellites, other aircraft. We're also hearing about long-range strike capabilities. They're saying it'll have unprecedented payload capacity. So, carrying a lot of firepower over long distances. That changes things.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a big deal. But perhaps the most important thing, the game changer, is how this jet works with those autonomous drones, the CCAs, what do they call them? The wingmen. What will those drones actually be doing?
Think of them as extending the F-47's reach, multiplying its power. They can take on tasks that are just too risky or would take too much from a manned aircraft. So things like reconnaissance, scouting ahead for threats, or even strike missions hitting multiple targets at once. They can jam enemy signals, act as decoys, draw fire away from the F-47.
So it's not just about one plane fighting another anymore. It's like a coordinated team effort.
Right. And then you have this built to adapt philosophy. That's about making sure the F-47 doesn't become obsolete. They're using digital design and open systems so it can be upgraded more easily and affordably. New software, sensors, whatever they need as threats change in the future.
There's been talk about those new adaptive engines from the NGAP program, and even some speculation about directed energy weapons like lasers. Are those things going to be on the F-47 right away?
Those adaptive engines, I think they're very likely. They can change how they work depending on the situation. Very efficient. The NGAP program is pretty far along. Lasers, on the other hand, that's more up in the air. It's a cool technology, but getting it to work on a fighter jet, it's hard. Power, size, heat, all problems to solve. If it happens, it'll probably be an upgrade later on, not in the first version.
So to really get a sense of how big a jump this is, can we compare it to the F-22 and F-35? Just based on what we know.
Definitely. So compared to the F-22, the F-47 is supposed to fly farther, be even stealthier, and cost less per plane. And they're planning to build a lot more of them than they did with the F-22, which was a limited run. And of course, it's got those next-gen sensors and the ability to work with drones, which the F-22 and F-35 can do, but not to this level. Plus, it's designed to be easier to keep running, doesn't need as much support. They're thinking about the whole picture. It's a shift in strategy. More bang for your buck, but with better capabilities.
Now, let's step back and think about the bigger picture. What does the F-47 mean strategically? How does it fit into what's happening in the world right now?
It's crucial for the U.S. to stay dominant in the air, especially with everything going on globally. The F-47, it's more than just an upgrade. It's a whole new generation. It's what the U.S. needs for future joint operations, working with other branches of the military. It's supposed to allow the U.S. to project power anywhere, even against really tough opponents.
Especially in places like the Indo-Pacific, where China is becoming a major military power.
It's exactly. General Alvin himself said that the F-47 is the world's first crewed sixth-generation fighter. And that seems like a direct response to China showing off their own stealth tech. The F-47 is designed with the Indo-Pacific in mind. It's meant to handle advanced air defenses like the Russian S-400 and the Chinese HQ-9. Those systems are a real threat to older stealth planes.
And we know China is working on their own sixth-gen fighter, and Russia has the Su-57, which is already in service. So where does the F-47 stand in this global competition?
The U.S. is clearly aiming to stay ahead technologically. It's a race, no doubt. But by calling the F-47 the first crewed sixth-generation fighter, they're saying they think their approach is better. The way they're integrating manned and unmanned systems, the specific stealth and performance they're aiming for, they think it gives them a real edge.
So with all this advanced stealth, the increased firepower, are we talking about a potential shift in the balance of power in the air?
Possibly, yeah. If it works as well as they say, it could be very difficult for anyone to challenge the U.S. in the air. And don't forget, the teaming up with those drones, the CCAs, that adds a whole new layer to air combat. It's a more networked, resilient Air Force. It spreads out the mission, less risk for the F-47 and the pilot.
So, big picture, the F-47 shows that the U.S. is serious about staying on top globally. And it's a big boost for the U.S. defense industry.
Definitely. It's not just about planes. It's about pushing the boundaries of technology, creating jobs, keeping that industry strong. And that has a ripple effect throughout the economy.
So let's talk about the contract itself. We know Boeing won it, but who else was in the running?
The big competition was Lockheed Martin. Northrop Grumman was interested initially, but they dropped out back in 2023. The fact that it came down to those two, Boeing and Lockheed, just shows how huge this program is.
What made the Air Force choose Boeing? What were they looking for?
They wanted the best, most cost-effective way to stay on top in the air. That was the goal. They said they did a fair and thorough evaluation, looking at cutting-edge tech, but also being responsible with, taxpayer money. It seems like Boeing's design was further along, more mature, and they were also looking at things like range, stealth, how adaptable the design is for future upgrades, and of course the cost per plane. They're hoping it'll be cheaper than the F-22.
And the contract they gave Boeing is, well, it's a lot of money.
Over $20 billion, yeah. It's a huge investment. And like we said before, it's going to be a big deal for Boeing, especially their St. Louis facilities.
Remember what happened in the stock market back on March 21st when they announced it?
Oh yeah, Boeing stock went up like 7%. Lockheed Martin's went down by about the same. That tells you everything about how much money is involved. And with Boeing investing billions in new facilities, they're obviously getting big on this program.
So looking ahead, how many of these F-47s could Boeing end up building?
We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in potential orders over the whole life of the program. This is a program that could last for decades. And that means thousands of jobs, lots of economic activity, not just for Boeing, but for all those companies that supply parts and services.
Then it's important to talk about where we're getting all this information from, right?
Yeah.
What are the experts saying? We want to make sure we're being thorough here.
Absolutely. The news about this contract, it was everywhere on March 21st. CNN, Reuters, The War Zone, AP News, Defense One, Axios, USA Today, even international outlets like the Economic Times. And the reporting was pretty consistent across all those sources.
And then we have the official statements from the Air Force and Boeing themselves.
Right. Those are important.
Yep.
Both of them put out press releases talking about the F-47, its capabilities, and how it's essential for national security. That adds a lot of weight to the information we've been discussing.
And the experts, what are they saying? People who really know this stuff.
Well, most of them seem pretty positive, supportive of the F-47. General David Alvin, he keeps talking about how much better it will be than current fighters in terms of range, stealth, and how adaptable it is. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he's also been vocal about its importance for projecting U.S. power globally. He even linked it to bringing back a warrior ethos in the military.
Retired Brigadier General John Tykert had some interesting things to say, too.
Yeah, he called the F-47 a generational leap in capability, talking about the increased firepower, speed, range, all that. And Wiz Buckley, he made a point that with this level of stealth, weapons, and communication, the F-47 could make those classic dogfights a thing of the past. And then there's Doug Berkey. He pointed out the strategic value of having all three big U.S. aerospace companies involved in stealth tech development.
Sounds like a pretty unified front. Anyone disagreeing? Any other perspectives?
Well, Elon Musk, he raised the question. He's wondering if manned fighter jets are still the best way to go, especially with drones getting so advanced. It's a valid point, and it feeds into this bigger discussion about the future of air warfare, how to balance manned and unmanned systems.
But it seems like most military leaders and analysts, they think the F-47 is a necessary step, that it's going to have a positive impact on national security.
Yeah, that's the main takeaway. Even though there are questions about the role of pilots in the future, the people in charge, the analysts, they mostly see the F-47 as vital for the U.S. to keep its dominance in the air.
So to wrap things up, it's pretty clear that the Boeing F-47 is a big deal. They're calling it the world's first crewed sixth-generation fighter, part of this whole NGAD program. That's a huge statement.
No doubt. We've talked about how they're trying to achieve new levels of stealth, how it'll work with drones, the extended range, all of that. And it's all to deal with the threats that are out there, which are only getting more advanced.
And the money involved, that $20 billion contract, shows how seriously they're taking this. This is going to have a big impact on the aerospace industry for a long time.
For sure. And while most experts are on board, we can't forget those questions about manned versus unmanned. Those are important. And the debate's going to continue as the F-47 gets developed and eventually deployed.
So here's something to think about. As the F-47 goes from the drawing board to the skies, how do you think this new era of air dominance, with all this human-machine teamwork, how will it change global security? How will it change how we fight wars in the air? It's something to keep in mind as this all plays out. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.